Welcome to another episode of Athens and Jerusalem. Let's begin where we can't escape. Let's begin with Logos.
Now, I would say that this openness, this being in the world, this referring to the world, to objects in the world, what I would like to call self-transcendence, this is disappearing as soon as you project a human being into a lower dimension than its own dimension.
Point of the V goes up to the nuclear explosion that created it.
Tell me this, Dr. Oppenheimer. Do you ever become frightened at what you're finding out here in this area that can't be measured in either time or space?
You see, that's a real point.
Do not be afraid. Open your hearts, open up your hearts.
Open up your hearts to Athens and Jerusalem, the infants of our culture, united, independent, polarized, and even bloody. Athens, the cradle of wisdom and rationality. Jerusalem, the cradle of faith and spirituality. In this podcast, we look at reunion. Could reason be more than modern secular skepticism? And could spirituality be more than belief? Welcome to another episode of the Athens and Jerusalem podcast. In this episode, the question we will elaborate is the relationship between human and divinity. What is this relationship? And of course, there might be people that will say that I don't have any relationship at all with divinity. And I got friends who says that. And I would say that in a way they are ignorant, but and of course that's a way to be in the world. But I think that this question is something that every human have to be connected to in one way or another. And the reason why is that this question raises one important question about what is human being, and also a question about the limits of what human beings are supposed to be or could be. And it's also a question about what divinity is. What is God, or what we understand as something higher or more divine than ourselves. So Cameron, Stephen, do you have any thoughts on the topic?
Well, maybe I'll start off for the sake of interesting conversation. I can start off taking the opposite view. So argue against me. You know, the world that we inhabit on a day-to-day basis, and that the laws of physics seem to so well describe, doesn't seem to have space for. It doesn't seem to have room for the operation of, extra physical material forces that so many people take to be the case if there is a God who interacts with the world in some sort of meaningful way. But the world that we actually inhabit seems to be a world well described by the laws of physics. So, which are mathematically described, write them down on a single sheet of paper, and produce, incredibly elaborate and accurate predictions from. So the first question I would ask, and of course, in the end, I'm very sympathetic to the question, but the first question I would ask is, why do we believe that there is a divinity out there with which we ought to have a relationship? On what evidence do we believe that there is such an external being? And I guess I'm phrasing the question in a way that I think will, I think points the way to one possible answer.
Cameron, what is your thoughts before we start to discuss what kind of divinity, or if something like that is existing?
Yeah, I mean, well, Yeah, this is a huge question. I mean, or the questions that you listed at the beginning of the episode. I mean, I'm sure require several sessions because they're they're big questions and they have multiple aspects. I mean, one could, of course, one way to approach it would be that, or one of the questions that you posed is sort of like, if there is a God, what would that God be like? So that's not because I don't think I think there's differences of views even about that. Like people who say they believe in God believe in very different gods. And in fact, maybe one could, in one way, say that just like with any knowledge, our personal understanding and knowledge of God is very personal to us. And the even if we, in sort of general philosophical terms, agree, but the the understanding that you and Steve have about the same God that we may all believe in is going to be different from mine, and even my own understanding of God is today different from what it was 30 years ago. So there is that sort of a aspect to it too. But I think I would like to pass the ball back to um, to you, because you said your friends who don't have a relationship with or don't believe in God are not totally with it, and I think Stephen's question was quite challenging. Yeah, but why not? I mean, because they probably think the same about you or me, for that matter.
Yeah, that we are. If you have this idea about something divine or higher than yourself, then okay, maybe we are naive or.
Mm,
But in my opinion, I because I do believe that human beings are limited, that we are our way of being, our way of reaching the truth or getting knowledge in our in the world. It is limited in many ways, and in my opinion, that uh, we are reaching out for something that is beyond that limit, and this is what I would call divine, or so then maybe even the mathematical or physical world knowledge could be part, because if we understand some knowledge as um, connected to truth or to the divine, then okay, maybe human have this ability to touch upon divine knowledge. Um, but then, of course, in this perspective, the divine is like what is being good or being perfect, and evil is like a lack of being. It's like this is the old metaphor is about the light and the dark, how the light has an existence, but the dark is just a lack of light. It
mm,
doesn't have an existence. Um, and but then but maybe, of course, maybe the divine also have part of evil, which I'm not sure, and of course that's also a question of what do we understand about something that is divine. But this is my understanding of how to, and this is also why I understand that we have a relation to it, and that this relationship, um, how to say it, uh, brings up what human being is, and the limits of human being. Yeah, Stephen.
Well, if we can, I think, all agree that our understanding is limited. We can all agree that we experience opposites in the world. We experience cold and heat, and we experience ignorance and knowledge, and we experience things which we identify as evil in contrast to that which we identify as good. We can decide to call that total good, the thing that is the limit of knowledge, all goodness, all that is right and beautiful. We can call that God, as a sort of reference point to that which is sort of the uttermost extremity of that which we regard as good. But why would we take the additional step of saying there is a personal relationship between us and that thing, that there is information flowing, from one to the other, that there's, say, as has been the case historically, uh, the existence of prophets who claim to speak, with the voice of God, who bring a message from God. Why should we believe in that God as opposed to the more philosophical God that you seem to be proposing of that which is simply the sum total of all knowledge, or the sum total of all good? Where do we get from the impersonal to the personal? Because once we talk about a personal God that sort of interacts in the world in a sort of historical way, then we're in this very difficult problem of, well, there's all these different historical gods. There's all these different claims about what God claims to say to us and wants us to do, that at some level are at odds with each other. Then we have to decide, well, which of these divine messages is the true message, because they aren't all saying the same. They aren't all saying the same thing.
I think that was one of the reasons why I raised this topic today, because in our last episode we discussed this about these narratives. How are we to bring a narrative of the divine into human being that could be like a universal narrative? And of course it's very difficult if it also should be a personal God or a personal relationship. But I think that, because and of course one of the this important question is that, okay, let's say that there is a relationship and we are limited, then am I able to say about the divine as a limited person? And could that be something that everybody could be actually, that we could agree on? This about prophets, and I find that very hard to. That there might be some people that has more abilities, or what should we say, something more than the other of us. But I find that very hard to believe in. I find it easier to think that everybody has, if we actually do discuss this question and discuss what kind of relationship we are able to have, then I think everybody could have like something in common, and some kind of narratives that everybody could agree on.
Yeah, I think I would just like to, in general terms, propose that I think once one decides or agrees on, or whatever, defines what one might mean by God, then I think certain um, conclusions almost sort of like logically follow from that. So let's say, let me try to make this more concrete. I mean, so if we assume that there is some sort of an intelligent, conscious existence that is far above and beyond that of human intelligence and existence, then I think one of the things that becomes apparent is that if there is a God, our definition of God would contain the fact that by its very nature, it is essentially unknowable to us. I mean, or we cannot sort of put God under our microscope. It's something that's beyond our understanding. A bit like how, if you would have made a painting, you know, the painting's relationship with you. I mean, the painting cannot really come to us, or even your dog, if you have a dog to whom you show a lot of love and attention, and the dog is very attached to you, but still has absolutely no real understanding of what or who you are. I mean, it has a certain understanding, but that understanding is totally insufficient to describe you fully. So then I would say that, so if there is a God of true perfection, then that means that we cannot comprehend such a God. But at the same time, we have to ask ourselves, why would have God, if there's a God, why would have God even created something? Because God could have just, like been by him or herself and just, I'm sure, but if you're the only uniquely perfect being, there's not much company you need. So the question is, why is there even an existence? I mean, not only how existence has come into being, but why is there actually an existence rather than nothing existing? And it's interesting that it seems to be now all world religions, as far as I know, their explanation of the why is that this thing that we call God uh, had something that we would call love and wanted to express that love, and thus created human beings to be recipients of his love. And that already sort of creates it's a bit like, a parent or parents who feel love, and then they want to create children to whom they can show this love that they have themselves. And that in itself, if something like that is true, and this is what I'm saying. So if there's a God, we have to then logically think of, why are we there? And we cannot be here, for his entertainment or for his, lack of company or something like that, because we are no company to him anyway. So it would almost seem that the only logical explanation would be that he has love to create us, and that already creates then a bond between us. But then the other thing that I think also logically follows is that how can such a God expect us to come into a relationship with something or somebody that we have no possibilities of understanding fully? And that, I think, then necessitates that God has to come with some solution of having somebody or something that can represent him to us and his love and his wisdom to us in a way that is comprehensible to us. And I think that is the kind of explanation that, again, all world religions give, that the founders of all world religions have claimed to be such sort of mediators between divinity and the rest of humanity. That although, I mean, they're human like us, so that we can relate to them, but that their knowledge and their influence and their power uh, has other than human origin. And that to me seems quite logical. Otherwise, I can't even quite understand, how we could even come into a relationship with God. So these are the sort of things that I mean, that once we decide what God is, then I think certain things would logically follow from it.
Hmm.
But I don't know.
I try to go back to the original, sort of, as far back as I can. I try to go back to the original question, why should we believe in God in the first place? And I can think of three possibilities. One is that, and what I'm looking at in the world are all these different conceptions of God. Some of them attached to systems, world religions, others attached in a more loose sense to collections of belief. And I can imagine, I guess, three different scenarios. One is that none of these ideas of God are true, because there is no God out there, and that God is in some way a reflection of a human psychological need to feel like it's a need to feel connected, a need to feel permanent, a response to fear of death, and so forth. And that conceptions of God can be completely understood as in terms of social construction. That's one possibility we have to consider. The second possibility of the three that I'm imagining is that there are all these different conceptions of God, and well, one of them is the true conception and the others are false. So then our problem is going and locating the correct idea of God out there, and then presumably trying to convince everyone else that this is the correct idea of God. This is, of course, what has historically happened. It's led to all sorts of conflict and oppression in the name of God. But those who believe that there is one correct conception of God would say, well, that's ultimately justified because that one God wants to be known in this particular way, and so it's our job to make everyone else understand that. That's the second logical possibility. And the third logical possibility, which is, I'll say the one that I favor, is that all of these conceptions of God can somehow simultaneously be true. Now, if I'm going to go that direction, and that's the direction I would like to go, I immediately have to explain why it is that all these different conceptions of God are so different and so irreconcilable with each other. Not just at the level of the fundamental, I mean, at every level, at the level of the fundamental theology, how many gods are there? Are there one, many? You know, in the case of, say, Buddhism, there isn't even a theistic conception of an existing God, but it's clearly a spiritual and profound way of approaching the divine. Um, and as well as them being very different at the level of social principles and what God is telling us to do. So how can one even go in that direction of saying, well, all these different conceptions of God can somehow be unified, that it is possible, as our initial question asked, to come up with a universal narrative of the divine? And I think one way through to that I'm inspired by my background in science is to understand is to take these different conceptions of the divine, which have been realized in different world religions, as models or approximations. Just as, say, Newton's law of gravity is a great model or approximation of how gravity works. It can be written down with one simple equation. You can make very accurate predictions from it, and so it's useful, and so people still continue to use it, even though for over a century it's been known that this law of gravity is, although it's 99% right in terms of what it predicts, it's 100% wrong in terms of the underlying space-time framework that it supposes. And so it's because we know that ultimately space and time are not fixed entities as is assumed in Newtonian gravity, but they can curve into each other as Einstein found. And so if it's possible in our scientific models to have working models that are useful, but nevertheless, let's say, metaphysically wrong, why is it not also the case to think about all these different religions of the world to be models of our relationship to what we call the divine, what we call God, what we have different words for, that that can be very different because these different models, these different approximations arose in different historical contexts at different times, in different cultures, in response to different needs. And so therefore the models are very different, but ultimately behind that, you can still imagine that there's a unifying framework that lies behind it. Then the question would be, okay, well, what's that unifying framework? If you're going to make that claim, you have to at least say something about what that underlying framework is, from which all these different conceptions of the divine can spring, and all of these highly irreconcilable, social configurations can spring. And the best guess there I can come up with is that somehow the divine has something to do with consciousness, both human consciousness and consciousness as it's spread out throughout the world in all living things. And that furthermore, it has something to do with that consciousness evolving into awareness, into higher degrees of awareness of itself in the end. And one can then kind of map all the different religions onto that conception of the divine as sort of a self-revealing consciousness, because that explains why we have, say, moral laws, laws that ask us to consider the needs of our neighbor, just as one example, that ask us to love others. Well, why should we love others? Well, if in loving others, human beings come together into, let's say, higher and higher configurations that unlock higher and higher degrees of consciousness, then we've kind of discovered that thread that runs through it. The thread is the thread that defines good from bad, that defines what a moral action is from an immoral action, is that which ultimately leads in the direction of higher degrees of consciousness. Why would that be? Because consciousness is ultimately self-generative. Ultimately, the God that lies underneath the world is the logos of the Gospel of John. That was there at the beginning, and that at the end becomes manifest. It's something which is it's the monomyth that Joseph Campbell talks about. It's the hero's journey, the starting from the village and going through the underworld and returning to the village. It's the self-discovery of the divine, which is also the self-generation of the divine. Anyway, I've thrown out a ton of things. I'm sure you have.
I think you also, in the end, do say something about the relationship. Because of course we could go back and discuss if okay, let's say that God or divinity is just something that is happening in the human mind or human brain, and we have this feeling that the need for connection. And what kind of relationship do we then have to our own lack of relation? That could also be maybe a way of
Yes, I mean, thinking of God, thinking of our relationship to God as a being out there who's, silently and invisibly listening to us, judging us, observing us, is one model of how we relate to the divine, but it's not the only one. Other models of the divine are the divinity within, that spark of the divine of which we are all instantiations. And the knowledge of God then becomes a matter of going inward until one discovers that spark of the divine within. How different is that from this idea of the God out there somewhere that's invisible, that has to be discovered out in the world or beyond the world? You might think, well, these are two irreconcilable views of the divine. They can't both be right. So now we're in model 2, but I still think that model 3 is a better way of looking at it, because whether one looks for that spark of the divine within, whether that relationship is one of intimate, personal self-knowledge, or whether the relationship is more like that of the king to the vassal, the great being to the humble creature, which is another model of relating to the divine, both of them can nevertheless end in the same moral direction. And that's, I think, the unifying thing. They end in the same moral direction because they both end with the idea of, I should transcend the limits of my ego and recognize the divine everywhere. I should expand my consciousness through greater learning, through greater awareness of things, through greater, exercise of my moral faculties. Both of those moral pathways can result from these very divergent ways of thinking about how God might exist and what our relationship to God might be. And even I would argue it's possible not even to have a conception of God as existing there somewhere that can be proven in some logical sense. The truly transcendent God, which is beyond existence itself, which is beyond any attribute that we can ascribe. And here we're into the territory of some of the theologians of Christianity and Islam, Sufism, for example, and Advaita Vedanta and so forth. And even that God, one is not having a kind of relationship of direct, prayer to, for example, or even or even looking within. But that ultimately transcendent God is something which is somehow infused in the operation of everything in the universe. It's the ground of all being, and still therefore relevant to human action.
Yeah, and I also think that if we understand the relationship as something that is inside our own consciousness, or part of our own consciousness, maybe is a better way of saying, uh, then in my opinion, it actually becomes more personal than if you have some kind of prophet or somebody else telling you what should be the correct way of acting according to a religious or a divine position. I'm not sure how personal. Okay, maybe I'm really I'm wrong here, but I don't understand how personal a religious position could be. But of course, I think people that really are into religious action, they feel themselves as part of something really great and really bigger than themselves.
It seems to me that the universal narrative of the divine that humanity really needs ought to encompass these different divergent ways of looking at God and our relationship to God, and validate all of them. In other words, those who truly see God as a personal being with one has an intense personal relationship, has been incredibly influential force throughout history, and is a living, breathing idea sustaining millions today. I don't think it should be our project to tell these people, oh, no, that's just an imperfect approximation of the true reality. The true reality is some being that's impersonal. I think it's possible for us to find a point where one can embrace the diversity of human views about the divine, human ways of relating to the divine, realize that there will always be a large group of people who relate to the divine as subject relates to object. And there will also be large groups of people who don't see the divine as object, but still have a relationship more as, where the subject object distinction, say, is dissolved. And there will be others maybe who prefer not to think about the divine at all, but still believe that there's a moral core and that there's a way we ought to live in the world. I think that, and I don't think it's our business to try to convince people that there's a correct way of thinking about it, but rather our job is more at the level of, in this world, how can we find ways of living and working together harmoniously in the face of these sort of naturally and intrinsically divergent ways of thinking about these matters of ultimate metaphysical concern. Of course, I'm saying this as if this is an easy thing. I mean, no one has managed to do this. No religious community has managed to do this. I mean, name a religion that is able to open up its theology to such a wide degree that it allows people who consider themselves as atheists, agnostics, theists, pantheists, deists, and so forth, all to be together in one community. It's a very difficult thing to do that I'm proposing. It's possible to do, but it's hard to point to any single community that has been able to do that. It's almost as though to create community up until this point historically, to create a community, human beings need to have a kind of consonance of belief, of core beliefs, that enables them to stay together as community. And that consonance of core beliefs has up until now precluded people with divergent beliefs from being part of that community. This sort of whole history of religious sectarianism and so forth. And just look at Christianity. Why is Christianity not one huge, beautiful religion today? Why is it riven into so many different sects, going back 1,000 years. Even though everyone agrees to the fundamentals of Christianity, of who Christ was, and the fact that he left this message in a book, still the religion has riven into thousands of sects. So it's not an easy problem to solve, but I believe that it is possible to solve it, even if I can't point to any historical example.
Because I think one really big problem, and if we see the historical changes in Christianity, especially with the Lutherans, they had this idea that you should have a personal relation to God, and by giving this possibility of a personal relation to God, then you ended up splitting the whole religion into different kind of sectarianism, because they all got their own view or their own. And this was the opposite of the Catholic way of presenting Christianity, where the Pope and had the main narratives, and everybody was just following his narratives. But then, and what we said, if I did understand you correct, Stephen, that was that we should actually still try to give like a personal relationship by focusing more inwards on human being and our consciousness and our possibility of experience by ourselves something greater than ourselves. But then, of course, then there's a huge problem that we might end up with like 7 billions different understandings. So how are we to give, or is it possible, if every human being actually tried to experience the divine by themselves, do they experience the same or not?
But I think most generally, as I said, I think this is a sort of a fundamental epistemological issue. I don't think that they even experience a potato exactly the same way, all of us, let alone divinity. I mean, I think there is this personal aspect to knowledge that even though we in rather general terms agree on what a potato is or what it is like to eat a potato, but still both our understandings of the nature and character of potatoes and our experiences of its taste vary. So I I think I would like to pose this question more perhaps in terms that, and I think this could be one way of trying to unify these aspects that Steve is referring to, is that if you could say like this, that like what are the different reflections of divinity that we can encounter in some way, like in which different ways can we see the face of God, as it were. And definitely, for instance, one way that many people I know in Nordic countries do it is when you go out to nature and when you see the beauty and majesty of nature. That is one way of encountering divinity. When you look at the goodness of a human being that is sincerely and truly good, that's another way of encountering that divinity.
Mm-hmm.
Or looking into your own purest thoughts and motives and deeds. And I think those founders of world religions, their message has not been so much like that they are, there to tell you how to think about God. They actually have gone much further than that. That they said, I'm here to somehow represent that God that you cannot understand and see otherwise, but look at me and my love and my wisdom and my power and my influence will give you something. I'm sort of like the face of God to you. So I think if you can look at things from this point of view, that like it's in old Persian poetry, there's this um, uh, symbolics of this man whose name is Majnun, which means the one who is
Insane.
insane, because he's insane by the fact that he's insanely looking for his beloved, and he's looking for her everywhere. And this beloved is called Layli. And he's looking everywhere. He's looking in the trash can, he's looking here, there, wherever, because he just desperately wants to see the face of her, of his beloved. And I think if this were our attitude, then we could find the face of our beloved in many ways and in many places, and they don't need to be competing with each other. I mean, the beauty of a Norwegian mountain does not compete with the kindness of a Norwegian person. They're complementary ways of encountering divinity. And so, to me, it's the existence, all of existence, is God showing Himself to us in many different ways. And the more ways we can see Him, the more wonderful.
That's beautifully put, comrade. I've been very influenced by Rudolf Otto in his book The Idea of the Holy, and he was a German Christian theologian writing about a century ago, and he tried to identify what is that thing behind all true religious experience, because his claim was that there is true religion and false religion, that all true religions contain something which he terms the numinous. And he takes a stab at describing it. And the way he describes it, it's not one single thing that's like one correct way of experiencing the divine, but can be experienced in all sorts of different modalities. And one famous, I would say, I guess, well-known passage for those who are familiar with this goes like this. The feeling of it may at times come sweeping like a gentle tide, pervading the mind with the tranquil mood of deepest worship. It may pass over into a more set and lasting attitude of the soul, continuing, as it were, thrillingly vibrant and resonant until at last it dies away and the soul resumes its profane, non-religious mood of everyday experience. It has its crude, barbaric antecedents and early manifestations. And again, it may be developed into something beautiful and pure and glorious. It may become the hushed, trembling, and speechless humility of the creature in the presence of whom or what? In the presence of that which is a mystery, inexpressible, and above all creatures. And I love how he's trying to put his finger on something which ultimately goes beyond words. And here we are trying to capture something in words that is, it's like capturing water with a net. You know, put the water into the ocean, you're never going to come up with put the net into the ocean, you're never going to come up with the water. And I think that's the problem with this idea of the holy, or this idea of the sacred, which I think is this common element to all these spiritual traditions. The unifying element is this sense of the sacred. And again, it's not one single thing that is only felt in the same way by all people, but there is something that is set apart from our everyday experience that can be accessed through different modalities: a walk in the woods, meditation, prayer, a beautiful relationship with another human being, just to start with. But all of these somehow unlock something which is felt to be potentially there at all times, but which we don't access at all times. It's almost as though there's a stream running through all things that we're not perceiving except at certain moments. And those moments are so powerful and so creative and so foundational to us that that billions of people on the planet in one way or another identify themselves with those groups and societies that have sprung up, that we call religions, that initially were built to facilitate our access to that sense of the holy. And now, unfortunately, what we think of as religions is so muddied by power by clerical classes which have arisen, by dogmatic finalities which have been added to it that tend to exclude and create hard boundaries around these communities, boundaries of belief. If you believe this, if you don't believe that, you're in, you're out. All of these sorts of accoutrements to religion and extra baggage has, I think, obscured what Rudolf Otto was trying to get at, which is this universal narrative of the divine. The whole the stream of the holy, of the sacred, which runs through every atom of existence.
Just
sorry,
Cameron.
go ahead.
No,
Yeah,
Cameron, please.
No. I just think that there's also a fundamental paradoxality in all of this. In the Baha'i writings, a reference is made to the fact that God is, on the one hand, the most manifest of the manifest, and at the same time, the most hidden of the hidden.
Mm-hmm.
So, in one sense, everything that we encounter is a reflection of the existence of divinity. When we look at the innocent eyes of a child, when we look at the beauty of the nature, when we look at the love between human beings, if we look at the way a flower blossoms, everything in some way tells us that there is that great perfection, beauty, love that has created everything. But at the same time, no matter how far, how deep we go in our understanding of all of this, we can never come, as someone now mentioned before, it's a mystery. It will always remain a mystery, and we can only come that far in our understanding of that mystery, and it will, in the final analysis, be incomprehensible to us. It's because we as imperfect beings, as you were saying, as limited in our understanding, can never fully understand something that is perfect and unlimited. So I think that we have to accept this paradoxality that God is everywhere and yet totally beyond our reach.
I think that this would be a perfect ending of this section. But then I have this just one question, and could also this conversation to discuss our relationship between human and God, could that also be a way of becoming more in contact, or what should we try to be in relation with the divine? Could that be also?
Absolutely.
It's just
For
nodding
next
with
time.
Yes. You cannot hear nods in the podcast. Yes, absolutely. I think that's a beautiful way of putting it.
In my opinion, I think to keep these questions alive, to have this kind of conversation, and also for all the listeners to discuss with their closest family or with friends their own understanding of the relation and what the divinity is. I think that's important part of being human.
Absolutely.
And whatever understanding they have, I think we could all agree that these questions should be raised.
Absolutely. I think
absolutely.
That's a beautiful ending to this.
So thank you for listening, and hope to see you soon again.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Athens and Jerusalem, created by Cameron Namdar, Stephen Phelps, and Knut Ove Essay. Nora Juel is the broadcast voice and technical support. Music is pieces of Edvard Grieg's Morning Mood. The voices in the intro are Viktor Frankl, interview with Robert Oppenheimer, and Pope John Paul II. Thank you for listening, and please check out another episode.